If you spend any time online, you've probably seen it. The combination of chastity devices and cuckolding is often pitched as this ultimate erotic power exchange. But here's the thing. Behind all the success stories, therapists are seeing a completely different and much darker reality. So in this explainer, we are pulling back the curtain on the serious and almost never discussed psychological risks. And that's exactly where we're headed. We're stepping into that shadowy landscape, moving past the polished online fantasy to really understand the real-world consequences when these two incredibly powerful dynamics get tangled up together. You've got this stark contrast, right? On one side, you have the online world. It's basically a highlight reel of perfect experiences, celebration, and community. But on the other side, you have this silent crisis that mental health professionals are seeing more and more. Look, this isn't about judging anyone. It's about bridging that huge gap between the celebrated fantasy and the potential for a really, really damaging reality. Okay, let's start with what is probably the most critical point of this whole discussion. This isn't just some behavioral game you can turn on and off. The combination of long-term chastity and cuckolding can actually neurologically alter your brain. It can fundamentally change how you see yourself. So let's talk about this idea of a psychological anchor. This is huge. The physical cage, over time, stops being just a piece of metal or plastic. It becomes a powerful mental trigger. It essentially anchors your entire sense of self and your sexuality to the device itself, making arousal neurologically dependent on the feelings of humiliation and denial that it represents. And here's how that happens. It's a cycle that looks a lot like addiction. You get this intense chemical high, dopamine, endorphins, from the eventual release after being denied for so long, and you combine that with the emotional rush of watching your partner. Well, that cocktail literally rewires your brain's reward system. Over time, your brain just recalibrates, and normal, conventional intimacy, it can start to feel neurologically boring or sometimes even impossible to get aroused by. And this leads us to a really difficult but absolutely critical question. For some people, this dynamic isn't just a fun sexual adventure. Some research suggests it can actually be something called counterphobic behavior, which is basically a way to unconsciously try and manage unresolved trauma. Think about it like this. If you have a deep-seated fear of betrayal or not being good enough, you might unconsciously recreate that exact scenario, but this time you get to control the terms. The chastity device becomes almost like a defense mechanism. It's a way of saying, hey, I can't possibly fail if I'm not even allowed to try. It can feel like empowerment, but what it might actually be doing is just reinforcing that original trauma. Now, all this internal rewiring, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It inevitably spills over into the relationship itself, and it can slowly poison the connection, often in ways that couples just never see coming until it's too late. In any healthy power exchange dynamic, this right here is the golden rule. The person in the submissive role, believe it or not, actually holds the ultimate power. Why? Because their consent is ongoing, and it can be pulled at any second with a safe word. That's the bedrock of safety. But here is the trap. When you combine long-term chastity and cuckolding, that fundamental power balance can start to erode, and sometimes it evaporates completely. The caged partner becomes psychologically dependent on a release that might never come, while the keyholder is getting sexual satisfaction somewhere else. It creates this severe and honestly potentially dangerous imbalance. And this usually leads to 3 specific traps. First, communication just dies. The caged partner becomes afraid to voice real distress because they think it'll be seen as breaking the fantasy. Second, empathy can erode. The keyholder can become desensitized to their partner's actual suffering. And third, you've got this cruel paradox. This lifestyle often appeals to couples who already have issues, yet it requires an absolutely rock-solid foundation to have any hope of surviving without causing serious damage. So, beyond all the psychological and relational strain, there are real, tangible, physical consequences. It's a hidden toll that often gets completely ignored in the chase for the fantasy. This lifestyle can create what experts call a compound stressor environment. Basically, multiple sources of stress are hitting your nervous system all at once, all the time. You've got physical frustration, emotional insecurity, a total loss of agency. This constant state of activation can lead to chronic anxiety, panic attacks, and stress disorders that bleed into every other part of your life. And hey, let's just be direct about the physical risks, because these are not minor issues. When the focus is all on the erotic part of it, basic hygiene and health can get ignored. This can lead to serious and sometimes permanent medical problems. Proper daily cleaning and checks, they are absolutely non-negotiable for safety. So you might be wondering, why do we hear about this stuff more often? Well, it's because of the social media illusion. Online forums create this powerful survivorship bias. You only ever see the curated success stories. The people whose lives and relationships were completely wrecked, they usually just disappear from those communities out of shame, which creates this dangerously skewed idea of how risky this can actually be. Okay, so we've identified a lot of the problems, but this explainer isn't about fear-mongering. It's about empowering you with knowledge. So let's pivot from the risks to some clear warning signs and actual actionable steps for harm reduction. You need to know that there is a very clear line between consensual play and psychological abuse, and this dynamic can make that line really blurry. If you recognize any of these signs, especially your partner using denial as a punishment or telling you that your genuine pain is just you failing at the lifestyle, that is a massive red flag. And this might be the most important warning of all. Getting out isn't as simple as just taking off the device. After your brain has been rewired for this very specific arousal pattern, trying to leave can trigger intense psychological withdrawal, depression, and even permanent sexual dysfunction where normal intimacy just isn't possible anymore. So if this is your lifestyle, harm reduction is absolutely critical. This means you have to actively work to protect yourself. Take mandatory, long breaks from the whole thing. Test the practices separately to see if you've developed a dependency. It is also vital to find a kink-aware therapist. And maybe most importantly, build a sense of who you are outside of this dynamic and this relationship. At the end of the day, all of this comes down to one thing. True, real, informed consent isn't just about saying yes to a fantasy you saw online. It's about deeply understanding the very real and potentially irreversible psychological and relational consequences before you even begin. So the final question we want to leave you with is this. If you're doing this, or even just thinking about it, you have to ask yourself with total honesty, is this dynamic truly enhancing your life and your relationship? Or is it slowly, piece by piece, eroding your fundamental sense of who you are? The answer to that question matters more than any fantasy.